Welcome once again to the Lotus Flower podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Pamela Robinson, and I am so excited once again to be back in your virtual and in your audio spaces this evening. I have a very special guest with me this evening, and I want you to know that you've got to go ahead, get your coffee, get your tea, get your books, get your pens ready to take some notes as we go forth with our guest this evening. However, before I bring the guest forward, I want you to know that this month we are going to highlight African American History Month. So, throughout the entire month, I'm going to be bringing guests on that will be talking about the different things that they do. And as they're talking about the different things that they do or about their stories, we're going to actually be able to see a variety of African Americans and how we are not a monolith. That even though we might have that same disposition, we may come from the same neighborhoods, we may eat the same foods, but we are not all the same. And so I want to make sure that I am highlighting those things for you to learn by this month. So as I transition to bringing my guests forward, I want you to know that the Lotus Flower podcast is a biblically based platform that actually is here to empower, encourage, and to equip you to live your very best lives. Now, this evening, I have with me Mr. Christopher C.J. Murphy. He is a mixed art artist, and we will be talking about mixing the mundane with the magical. This is season number 3, episode number 40. Mr. Christopher C.J. Murphy is a resident of Raleigh, North Carolina. However, he began his mixed art media career in Fayetteville, North Carolina. His work centers on the abstract interpretations of everyday life, as well as how the Black experience crosses and interacts with the surreal. CJ's creations reveal an imaginative world that lives right in the corner of our perception. His work has been shown across the state of North Carolina in venues such as Art Space, 311 Gallery, and VAE Raleigh. This episode is streaming live tonight on the Dr. Pamela Robinson Facebook page and on the Lotus Flower YouTube channel. And I want you to be sure to like, comment, and to subscribe to the Lotus Flower podcast. We will now have our countdown screen, and after that, I will bring forth none other than my special guest, Mr. Christopher, art artist. Thank you. And now I'd like to welcome to the screen my special guest, Mr. CJ Murphy. He's a mixed art artist in Raleigh, North Carolina. Welcome to the podcast.
All right, thank you. So good to be here. So good to be here.
Thank you. Will you tell us what makes Mr. CJ want to be a mixed art artist?
Sure, sure. So, not to give you the long story, but I originally started my educational career in engineering, specifically textile engineering. I had this sense that I wanted to create. I wanted to create, and as a lot of us do. And I think sometimes in the school system, when you are a creative person, people like to push that more towards engineering and the STEM subjects for good reason. Obviously, STEM can be a little bit more financially stable, let's say, than becoming an artist. But I did some time at NC State University, and I took a semester and a half off to work.
Mhm.
And I worked at this one engineering firm. I was down in Elizabethtown, and it was okay. It was just okay. I didn't feel this sense of, this is where I want to be. This is where I'm meant to be. This is where I was placed, on this earth to be. And I came back to NC State, and I thought about it, and I talked to my parents. I talked with my advisors, and I decided to switch. So I didn't fully switch over to art quite yet, but I did
Mhm.
start, really making art at this point. I was putting together these collages just out of, scraps of magazines and newspapers that I had found. And even that, just the act of making those collages made me feel so much better than any of the time that I had spent doing engineering work. So I
Mhm.
switched over to museum studies for my degree. And that was a change that allowed me to be in, these spaces and museums and institutions where I could look at their collections of art and the
Mhm.
collections of art that they had. And that was just so valuable to me. And I started making larger and larger pieces of art. I switched from collages to masks to larger sculptures,
Mhm.
and I got a studio in downtown Raleigh. I moved around a bit, but it was a change. It was a very welcome change, and I
Mhm.
would not have done it any other way. So,
That is excellent to have taken where you started and you turned it into something that you really are very passionate about.
yes.
Tell us, what is mixed art media?
Sure, sure. So, you know, I think a lot of art gets categorized, rightfully so, based on the main medium that they use. So, of course, paint, clay, stone, even collage is its own form of art.
Mhm.
But I found very early on, sort of at this boundary where I stopped making as many collages, that the work that I wanted to produce really didn't fit into any of these big categories. I use paint, I use clay, I use plaster, I use paper, I use whatever I can get my hands on.
Mhm.
And I stopped trying to, shove it into a specific box, and kind of just went with the label mixed media, because it more, I wouldn't say necessarily accurately, but is a much easier term to describe, rather than, oh, well, sometimes I use paint, sometimes I use drawing, sometimes I use, little scraps of metal that I found while walking down the street. Mixed media just kind of wraps it all up in a much nicer bow to explain.
Okay. It so wraps it all up. A lot of. So, what inspires your art, CJ?
Sure. So, I have a lot of inspirations, however much time you have, but I am inspired a lot by the surrealism movement. So the surrealism movement, if you haven't heard of it, is kind of stems from the 40s and 50s of, let's depict the world, maybe not necessarily as it is,
Mhm.
but put a layer of symbolism over it, put a layer of the whimsical, of the fantastical over it, because that, it can cause people to reevaluate the everyday world that they interact with. And what is art for if not changing your perceptions?
Yes.
So my my pieces that I try and put together take items or take properties or concepts that we work with every single day, that we see
Mhm.
all of the time, and twist it and reinterpret that into something that may not look familiar, but feel
Mhm.
familiar. A lot of dreamlike imagery, a lot of, anthropomorphization of things that, normally aren't in a humanoid form. And, I think that it's just a very good way of changing the way you see the world.
Mhm.
There's a lot of artists that I follow that do this kind of work. Wengechi Mutu, she is a collage artist that works out of DC,
Mhm.
and the way that she puts these compositions together, she likes to work with black bodies. She likes to only use them in her collages, which I think is it's a very very valuable thing to show. Just to see black figures outside of the traditional canon of the story of suffering. And,
Yes.
it's not that there's not a place for that, because, we cannot forget this history. But
Right.
I don't think that every time you see, a black person in an art museum on the wall, it's in the context of slavery or Jim Crow. I think that it's important to show
Yes.
that no, like we have fun, like we get down and we can do things that aren't that. So I love her
That's
work because I think it's just such a good example of let's mix it up a bit. Let's change the formula around. So she is one of my big inspirations, most certainly.
that is amazing, and I love the idea of showing all different sides of
Mhm,
African Americans, not just the one thing that we often see when we do go into those
mhm,
museums. And that is why we're focusing on this entire month. African Americans aren't a
mhm.
monolith. We're not all cut
No,
from the
not at
same
all.
cloth. So when I saw you when we last
Mhm,
Saturday when you were had a booth set up at the African American celebration, and it was amazing how you had your the
ah,
statue, for lack of a better word, that had the lights in it and had the cords hanging down, and then you had some other work on
mhm.
the table, and those two little boys that were at the table before me and my young adult children
Mhm.
came to the table. They were so intrigued by what you had, and they were just
Yeah.
talking, 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 talking a mile a minute.
Mhm.
And you wanted to talk to us, and you saw we were waiting to talk to you, but I was like, no, you take your time and talk to those little boys because they were
They
just
were.
so
Mhm.
interested, and you were feeding their minds. And I said, I am going to invite him on the podcast because just like those little boys were so intrigued, there are people that are listening to this podcast all over the world, CJ, that need to hear what you have to
Perfect.
share because you're going to spark their interest. Some people are intimidated by trying
Mhm.
something different and they might think they won't succeed at it. I want you to tell the audience this evening, was there ever a time where maybe you weren't as confident with leaving your career, not career, but leaving when
Mhm.
you were pursuing that engineering degree? Were there a time in your life that maybe you had second thoughts about it? Is this really going to
Mhm.
work out for me? And then what gave you the courage to go forth
Sure, sure.
anyway?
And not to scare anyone, but every single day, I still have those thoughts of, oh man, this is not as stable as a career in engineering would be. This is not as stable as a career as a librarian or a museum historian could be. Every single day I do have those thoughts. And
Mhm.
I know some of my friends who, may want to switch to a more creative career, and they get scared off by those thoughts. And I think that that's a very natural reaction. We all have to eat, we all have to work. But I would say that, at least as far as advice goes, you don't have to jump into the deep end. You don't have to, decide that I want to be an artist. That means I have to quit my job and move to New York. You don't have to do that. And I see that narrative get pitched to so many new artists and so many new creatives, and it scares them off, rightfully so. But you don't have to do that. You can dip your toes in. That's exactly what I did. When I was at NC State, I, at first devoted 5 hours a week, 1 hour a week, shoot, like 30 minutes a week to making art,
Okay.
to just exploring that creative side. And eventually,
Hmm.
that grows to 10 hours a week, that grows to 20 hours a week. And it does start to kind of push out the other stuff. So that's the big thing I would
Hmm.
say when faced with any sort of, jump you might want to make is don't jump. Just don't do it. Dip your toes in, wade into it, because there's
Hmm.
there's nothing that says that you have to. And I find that a lot of the artists that I'm around, a lot of the artists that I interact with are not people who woke up one day, decided they want to be an artist, and quit their job the very next day. They are people who
Okay.
worked or still do work in other fields,
Hmm.
sometimes completely differently. An artist that I know, she paints, she's an oil painter, but she's a nutritionist by day. But she gets off of work
Hmm.
and sometimes we'll spend 1 hour, sometimes we'll spend five, and it's completely up to her just to produce the work.
Hmm.
So that's the big thing is don't feel like you have to do this or that. You can do both.
I
You
see.
truly can do both.
Mhm.
You really can.
So would you say it's somewhat of freelancing at
100%.
at
This
times?
this this career falls more into freelancing than anything else, and it's not, I'm obviously not getting a consistent paycheck, direct deposit, obviously, but through sales, and I do artist talks and I lease my work out, you know, it can work. It can work. And then it's very non-traditional, and it's not something
Mhm.
that I ever think is going to be advertised to you outside of an art school itself, but it is very doable and it is very, very rewarding to be able to work in a field that not only I enjoy, but as a not that this should ever be a motivator, but a field that some people say that you can't succeed in. There is a certain pleasure in being like, no, you actually can do that. You actually can do that.
That's great. Now, as an African
Mhm,
American male, and you are pursuing this career,
mhm,
freelancing per se. However, it is somewhat
mhm.
non-traditional to see an African American male pursuing this particular
Yes.
art medium. So, how is that challenging, or how is it maybe even not challenging to you as a male showing up in some of the spaces and places that you find
Sure,
yourself
sure.
in?
So, I guess to start with the bad news, it is challenging. It is challenging. I don't think that it's a surprise to very many to know that the art world, even as it currently stands, is, kind of foundationally very white. And not just white, but
Mhm.
European white. So not even this side of the
Okay.
Atlantic. Um, and sometimes you'll enter a space or you'll apply for a call for a gallery and understand almost implicitly that you are not meant to be there. And in those
Okay.
times I have found that it is just best to do it anyway, because even
Okay.
if I don't get in that gallery, even if I feel uncomfortable in a location that I may not just be the only black male but the only black person there, period, I
Mhm.
have this thought of, well, the next time they see a black person, it's not going to be as much of a surprise. So,
Okay.
as it was done for me, as there were people who came before me that allowed me to get to the place where I am. I know that I have to take my place in this great chain, and it might be uncomfortable a little bit. I might feel discouraged at times,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
ultimately, even if I don't get it, just the knowledge that I am making it easier for the guy that comes next, the young black male who's assigned to be an artist, just making it easier for him to be accepted into this space, it makes it worth it for me.
Mhm.
But I don't want to make it sound like it's all downsides and all challenges when it comes to that,
Okay.
because
Mhm.
as time goes on and as culture progresses and changes and shifts, there are some spaces that have now opened up that were not, an option previously. I think where we met at the African American Cultural Festival is a really good example of that. If I were a white man, I would not have been able to show my work there. So,
Exactly.
I think living in, America right now, I think we have a lot of, different challenges and a lot of different spaces that we have to face. But I don't want to deny that I can get indoors in Black spaces, and these Black spaces are now becoming more popular. There's a very popular art collective. They're not based in America. They're based in England. They're called Ludi, but it is a Black organization. Like they work with Africans and African Americans, and like if you're not African American, you can't show there. And not that I think that I don't think that this kind of reverse thing is necessarily always the case, but it gets you in the door, and it kind of shows that, hey, remember when they did that to you? It's okay, because you can come in here and we will welcome you and we will accept you and we will help you to succeed, So, I don't want to make it sound like all downsides, because I've had a good time in certain places. I really have. So
That's good. But
there was
there
a
is a
balance.
balance, and that's what I want you
Mhm.
to talk about, because people need to know
Of
both
course.
sides of
Mhm.
the story, and that's good. Now, and in my research about the topic, I've learned that mixed media is closely related to other forms of art, such as
Mhm.
assemblage and collage. Can you explain to us what assemblage is, and then what is
Sure.
collage? And do they both exist together or
Yeah,
separately?
sure. So, I do mixed media, and I would say that mixed media is directly in the middle of collage and assemblage. I don't know, everyone pronounces it differently. I pronounce it assemblage, but I've heard everyone pronounce it differently. Um, so I
That's
started
fine.
with collage, and collage is, the practice of taking paper scraps, be they from
Mhm,
magazines or newspapers or, little menu fragments that you tore out last time you were at Waffle House, and combining
mhm,
them into a completely new image. So I see a lot of people who will take the tiniest fragments and take the color scraps and turn them into portraits, beautiful portraits. I have also seen people that will
mhm,
take much larger chunks, like maybe a cutout of a building or, a little tiny scrap of like a music note, and combine that
mhm,
into the larger image. And these images can be symbolic, they can be, completely pictorial, they can be representational. But that's the art process. It's to take the tiny pieces and reconstitute them.
mhm,
Assemblage falls on the complete other end of the spectrum. If collage is fully two-dimensional, assemblage is fully three-dimensional.
mhm,
And it's exactly the same process, exactly the same, but
mhm,
rather than using, a scrap of paper, you are now using, oh, I found, this little rock that I think would be perfect. Vanessa German, she is an assemblage artist, like primarily, and
mhm,
she creates these gorgeous, gorgeous pieces, mainly from stuffed animals, mainly from items she finds at thrift stores,
mhm,
and kind of a lot of objects that she just finds around her house. And without using paint, without using, all of these other, I guess, more traditional, whatever that means, art
mhm,
pieces, she can create these huge sculptures just by taking these little pieces that, when they were created, had no intention of being in sculpture, and combining them together. And mixed media is right in the middle. So mixed media is not fully three-dimensional, it's not fully two-dimensional. It combines aspects from both. And, that makes it a very flexible, sort of place to be, because I don't have to, fully commit myself to using two-dimensional pieces, but I'm also not saying I only can use three-dimensional. It's the best of both worlds, and some people can find that when you are allowed to use everything, it becomes a lot harder to choose everything. But
mhm.
that's right where I exist, because sometimes I find it hard to choose one thing to use to make art. So having the flexibility to allow myself to use whatever I want. If I find a cool coaster, I'll use that. If I find, a really interesting image in a newspaper, I'll cut that out and use that. So just being able to use truly whatever I want is the flexibility. It's unmatched. It is.
That's excellent. So that leads me right into what's been really intriguing for me is what makes mixed media art popular amongst the art shows that you might.
Mhm. Oh, I'm sorry, you're cutting out a bit. I didn't hear the second half of that question.
It's so what makes it popular?
Sure, sure. So I would say the popularity from mixed media, or at least from what I've seen from the people I know who are kind of on the other side of the line,
Mhm.
is it's just so interesting to look at. And that's not to kind of, hate on paintings or sculpture or any other kind of work, because they're all, beautiful in their own way. But when you look at a mixed media piece, there's I like to call it the first look and then the second real look. Because the first look, you see the entire thing. You see a sculpture of a man. You see a dog walking down the street. But almost like those like magic eye puzzles of like the late 90s, where you'd look at it and then you'd look closer and there'd be like a dolphin or something. I think that that's a lot of the appeal with a mixed media piece, because after this first look, after you've seen what it's supposed to be, you then start to visually pick apart all of the layers. So, you can take a look at one of these Vanessa German pieces. You could take a look at one of my pieces and see the nails. They're like, oh, those are construction nails. You can see, oh, that's not fabric. That's like a bunch of newspaper staples together. Oh, that's painted. Oh, that's 3D printed. And it becomes like a visual banquet of sorts. And you can kind of start to realize that this piece that's in front of you isn't just the product of one painter or one sculptor. It's actually the product of millions of people, the millions of people that went into shipping this stuffed animal across the world to get it to the States where I could find it in a thrift store. It's the random set of circumstances that caused a construction worker to drop these screws where I could find them. And even though I am, just one person, mixed media is a very collaborative art form. And I think that's really what makes it so popular. Everyone can see just a bit of themselves in every mixed media piece. And that's very appealing. That's very appealing.
That's excellent. Excellent. Now talk to us a little bit about when you talk. I heard you say, this was actually 3D printed.
Mm.
And when I was at your table last Saturday, I saw some of the work that you had used a 3D printer to actually create. And I'm familiar with 3D printing
Mhm.
because I was at another art show in my hometown of Kalamazoo, Michigan, and I had learned. I
Mm.
saw someone actually using a 3D printer. This was actually a person that was a veterinarian, and
Mm.
she was using it in one of her shows where she was talking about her business and trying to really pull African American children into wanting to be, veterinarians.
Mm.
So
Okay.
she was creating these 3D dogs and 3D puppies and things like that, and they were just fascinated by it.
Yeah.
And so you could tell that I just love to really get people's minds going and have
Mhm.
their energies going, especially little kids.
Of course.
So I want you to tell the audience this evening a little bit about 3D printing. What is it, and how do you utilize it in what you do, CJ?
Sure, sure. So, as just a brief overview, 3D printing is it's part of a set of relatively new technologies in which, rather than making a part in very traditional methods by, casting it from metal or sculpting it from stone or carving it from wood. You get a machine and you tell this machine a very specific set of instructions. And these instructions lay down melted plastic layer by layer, very thin layers. We're talking, fractions of millimeter layers. And it lays them down layer by layer. And what you get at the end is a completely finished part. And what makes 3D printing really, appealing as compared to different types of production or creation is the fact that it's relatively quick. And once you have designed your model in a 3D digital design software like Tinkercad or SolidWorks, it's very hands-off. You send the instructions to the printer and the printer starts heating up some plastic and it lays it down, and I don't have to touch it after that point.
Okay.
So 3D printing as we know it today has kind of been around since late 90s, early 2000s, but it really started taking off around 2010 when, just due to some other factors of globalization, printers became relatively cheap. If you were living in 2001, 2002, 2003, pretty much labs, really big corporations, they were the only ones who had 3D printers. But around 2011, 2012, the technology became very democratized and very widely available. So I remember I got my first 3D printer for Christmas when I was like 10, 11. And it was a tiny thing. It was, maybe yay big. I could print like keychain size objects on it. But I mean, it was like $150, which, coming from the realm of $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 is very affordable. And normally, normally is relative, but normally 3D printers are utilized more on the STEM side of things. They are very good for testing parts that an engineer or a scientist might use before they spend a bunch of money to get it made in metal, because it is plastic. It is not very strong. It's pretty weak. But if I am trying to create a new idea for a water bottle or a new idea for a lamp base, then I can 3D print it. I can have a version of it that I can test in 3 hours rather than, cranking a machine and drilling it out to have a, 12, 24, who knows how long. But while there have always been, people on the fringes who have used 3D printing for art since its inception, I wanted to take that a little further. I wanted to, really push what I could do artistically with a 3D printer. So, there was a point in time where I upgraded. I switched to a much bigger device, and I am now able to print things that are the size of basketballs, which, I mean, that's pretty big, when we're talking about art.
That is huge.
And at first I was still printing relatively normal things, you could say. I was like, oh, I need a little tiny, thingamabob just to fill in the gap here. I'll print that. Oh, I need a little rod. But I was like, I can push this. I can keep going. I had a very interesting studio visit about a year ago, and I'll summarize it. But the main gist was, if you're gonna use the 3D printer, use it. And I didn't really get it at the time, and it took some thinking. It took some, kind of meditating on that. But I think I got what he's saying, and the sense was, don't use the 3D printer to do what you could do without a 3D printer. Because at that point, especially in art, you're not using it to its fullest advantage. So I started working with different materials that you could print with. I started working with different shapes. And especially when it comes to some of the masks that I produce, a lot of the fun of using the 3D printer is getting shapes, is getting forms that technically you could create without a 3D printer, but it would be very hard and it would be very expensive. So that has been the fun. I work with these materials that are like 50% plastic, 50% wood, which gives you, sort of a weird balance of something that is as light as a water bottle, but completely made, like it's got this wood fiber in it. So you can sand it, you can stain it, you can do all the things you would do with wood. I've worked with this material that's 50% the normal plastic and 50% iron fillings. So you can print in all of these weird, fantastical shapes, but at the end of the day, have something that can rust and something that is magnetic and something that you can interact with as if it were a metal item. And I think that experimentation is really at the heart of the 3D printing revolution, as you would call it, because it's just such a versatile tool. And it just combines so well with a lot of the stuff, and it ties into mixed media, very well. It does. So
It does. I remember you had, when I was at your table again,
Hmm.
you had those masks.
Yes.
They were like African American faces, and
Mhm.
they like it. What it did feel like wood, but it did feel like plastic at the
Mhm.
same time.
Mhm.
And you made those with your 3D printer, of
Yep.
course. Right? That's
Mhm.
amazing. Now, how do you think that 3D printing and mixed media art will actually be affected by AI?
Oh, that now that's a good one. That's a good one. So I've got a couple of thoughts if you have the time. So I think the big one about how AI is going to interact with mixed media and 3D printing
Mhm.
is, and I'm going to take a more optimistic spin than I've seen some of my peers take.
Okay.
In it's going to help to reduce the more mundane aspects of the creation process,
Mhm.
because no matter what you do in this world, there are boring parts of it, and that's just life. I have to file taxes just like everyone else.
Mhm.
And I think when it comes to art, I think there are going to be people who, go to an AI art generator and say, I want a picture of a dog riding a bike, and they're going to get that. But I,
Mhm.
I think that those people who are doing that now are people who were always looking for the quickest way to do things. I don't think that the people who do this are new in society. I think they just have a new toy to play with, because
Mhm.
most of the artists that I know don't use that at all, and have never even considered it, and also don't feel threatened by it,
Mhm.
because unless something truly magical happens in the next couple of years, there is not going to be an AI system that is able to take random bits of trash from thrift stores and other artists and combine them into a sculpture. That's just not going to happen.
Mhm.
But I am looking forward to, in a couple of years, when I am creating a 3D model to 3D print, and I can send that to an AI and be like, hey, dial in all of the settings and dial in all of the kind of fine tuning that I need for the 3D printer.
Mhm.
And sort of to have AI as this digital, I don't even know how to classify it, as this kind of digital assistant. I think
Mhm.
I think it's where it's going to settle, and I think that that's a good place for it to be. But it is very interesting to see the shakeup that it's causing.
Oh,
And
yes.
everyone has a different opinion on it. I like it. I think that things have been very stagnant for a while, and I think that just dropping this new technology in the mix and seeing how people adapt to it, it
Mhm.
is very interesting. I would say that if I were I guess, more traditional 2D artist, maybe I would be a little more worried.
Yes.
But, I've also seen that, like, the main people who are using AI and AI generated images to a shockingly concerning degree are
Mhm.
really large corporations.
I see.
And I'm like, I mean, it seems like a match made in heaven. You wanted a cheap image. Here's a cheap way to get an image.
Mhm.
Point blank period. But the artists that I know, and the artists that I know a lot of people want to be, were
Mhm.
never involved in that process.
I see.
But it's just such a mainstream thing. Everyone is talking about it. And I think that that scares off a lot of people from going into art. They think that, oh man, now that AI can make art, I don't need to make art. And that's patently not true. That's just not true.
Mhm.
I had a friend of mine, we were talking about this exact thing. And he brought up a very good point that I had not considered. He brought up that this sort of like mainstream panic that you see sometimes amongst people with AI, the
Mhm.
same thing happened when photography was invented. People
Mhm.
saw the camera and they were like, I am never going to be able to draw landscapes again. I'm never going to be able to draw a portrait. The camera has put me out of business
I see.
because it can replicate any image that exists. But as we all know, portrait painting has not gone out of style. Landscape painting still very much exists. And as a weird turn, photography is now an art form.
That's
This thing that we thought was going to destroy artists' jobs
mhm.
not only did not do that, but became an art form in and of itself. So I'm very excited for the future where once the dust has settled a little bit and people get a little bit more comfortable with this technology and hopefully it's not abused because there's always the chance for abuse,
That's
but
right.
that we understand that this at the end of the day is just technology
Mhm.
and it is only as good or as bad as the people using it are. And I
Mhm.
think that's the big thing.
That's excellent. That's excellent. So, what would make a person more intimidated, though? I know you spoke a little bit about, touched on it a little bit about they might be afraid that they'll never be able to do the
Mhm.
type of work and maybe to the quality that they have been doing it. But what would make someone more intimidated about having this new platform come about? AI, I hear it talking about all over the news, all
Mhm.
there's good things about it and things that are not so favorable about AI. And we know that is what's
Mhm.
going to actually, by the time 50 years from now, we'll have AI. I'll just be able to sit here and I'll
Mhm.
say something and it will just create it
Yep.
for me without even having to think. Guess what, CJ? Even in college, those of us that have gone through college, we may not
Mhm.
have to write our papers anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
just
Oh
be able
yeah.
to sit here and tell it what to do and how to write that
Mhm.
doctoral dissertation that
Right.
I spent 3 years writing. I would just tell AI to write it.
Mhm.
Yes, so tell
Yeah. Of
I
course.
yes,
Yeah. I mean, you bring up such a good point. I mean, like literally 5 years ago, the thought of telling a computer to write a paper and then it doing it was unheard of.
that's
I
right.
think I think right now a lot of the people who I would say are rightfully kind of nervous, rightfully kind of intimidated by AI, at least in terms of art, I can't speak for other fields,
Yes.
are the artists that work on commission. So, especially people who draw, people who paint, I think that, I would be a little nervous if I were them too, because, previously, if you were a customer
Mhm,
and you had an idea that you wanted to see realized in paper, you had to pay an artist to go and do that for you.
mhm,
And, the artist would obviously produce a very quality work,
mhm.
but that's not really the case right now. If I, for the previous example, if I wanted to see an image of a dog riding a bike, I don't have to pay an artist to do that. I can have, AI do it in like 3 seconds and for free, and obviously, like, I wouldn't say that it's going to be as good as an artist, as good as someone who has trained and studied and done this for a while, but I do also think that some of the customers who may be requesting that aren't looking for what is the best. They're looking for what's the quickest and what's the cheapest. And that is right now AI. So I do think that if I were an artist who worked a little bit more with customers, I think I'd be scared. I'd be a little scared. Um, Fortunately, right now I'm not in that position, but I do have some friends that I've got a friend. He makes stickers. He makes these custom stickers that people want, and they put on their laptops and they put on their cars and whatever. And he's expressed to me like when AI became this thing that everyone had access to, he did see a little dip in sales because now when someone wanted a sticker of whoever doing whatever, they didn't have to pay him for that. They could just go on a website, have it done in 5 seconds, and not just have it done in 5 seconds, but have 50 different iterations of that thing. And, that is just a workload that I don't think a human will ever be able to replicate. So I do, my heart does go out to those artists. I do stand with them a bit. And, just to broaden it a bit, I do think that there are some very serious copyright, intellectual right issues, because as we're all learning, the AI doesn't know anything. It's a program, but the data that they are feeding it is coming from artists who are living, artists whose work is still, it's like it's not in the public domain, but they're feeding it into it. And now when you ask AI to make artwork in the style of insert artist here, their work is being sampled and remixed and kind of used without their permission. And I don't agree with that side of it. And I think that some of those issues need to be addressed. But it's just, it's so hard to understate how new this technology is. And, a lot of this concern and shakeup is because we don't even really know what it is. This
right.
company, came on the internet one day and said, here is this thing, you guys have fun with it. And we're all like, I don't know what to do with this. So, I think that some people are concerned very, very rightfully so.
Yes. However, I'll ask you,
Yep.
is it concerning to you? And I'd like to scale it.
Mhm.
I'm actually I'm a therapist by trade, and I do a lot of scaling with my clients. So I'm going to do a scale with you. So
Yeah.
on a scale of 1 to 10, where might your level of intimidation fall, CJ?
Mhm. I would say a scale of 1 to 10, my level of intimidation, I'm gonna say a solid 6 to 7. 6
Okay.
to 7. And that is a lot. It is a lot. It's over 5 at least.
Yes, it
And
is.
I think that intimidation for me isn't coming from the state of where AI is today.
Mhm.
But I have no doubt that within 10 years, 15 years, that it will be able to do that. Of like, hey, I need a thing, and it will make that thing. Especially when you start connecting it to 3D printers,
That's
and other machines. And I think I'm more worried about that day because and this is gonna sound weird. I think this is gonna sound weird, but I think a lot of people, come to see my art or enjoy my art or purchase my art because it's not something that they could make at home. And I think that your average, citizen is very creative and may just not have the time to devote to making art. But I think that when you have a device that can make the art without any time,
exactly.
you know, ugh. So I don't think AI will in any form, 100 years from now, I don't think it'll ever truly replace the artist in society because I think the artist serves a lot of roles other than just making product.
Mhm.
Um, but I am concerned that the number of living artists could dwindle in the coming years. So,
That's very good. Good analogy.
mm,
I'd like to actually take a moment to show your website.
sure, sure.
I have it here. I'd like to bring it up. I'd like us to talk a little bit about it because
Of
I
course.
want those that are listening, not only here in the United States, but all over into other countries to get to know who CJ Murphy is. And if they want to reach out through your website, then they'll have a chance to hear you talk a bit about it. And they'll have the address of your website, and they can actually go in and possibly network, connect with you, and possibly even purchase some of your work in real time.
Sure.
Tell us the web the web.
Yeah. So my website is it's cjmurphy.org.
Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and show this website now, and you and I will go ahead and talk a bit about it.
Sure.
So I'll bring it up on the screen as we will share. So I have your website up before us at this time, and especially look at those products that he has created and go ahead and purchase those, not only for yourself, but I want you to purchase several products for your family, friends, and loved ones. And also, guess what? Valentine's Day is coming up.
Yes, it is. Yes.
I know that we women, we love unique things, and men love unique things as well. So
Mhm.
why not go ahead and purchase one of CJ's works of art and give that to your loved one, especially that special loved one in your life. Yes, and I love the artwork that you have
Thank
created
you. Thank you.
so very much for showing those to us. And your website is just wonderful. It's so colorful and
Thank you. Thank
it's
you.
very nice. Did you create that yourself, or you have a website developer?
Yeah, no, I made it myself. I use Squarespace because it makes it easy for people who, don't go to school for that.
Mhm.
But yeah, after like 3, 4 hours of just like looking at tutorials on YouTube, you can figure out Squarespace. This isn't a Squarespace ad, but I love Squarespace and I cannot recommend it highly enough.
Well, good. I'm so glad. Thank you so much.
Yes.
What might you want to share with my listening and or viewing audience before we peruse to a close? So maybe something that I hadn't asked you, maybe something you
Mhm.
might want to encourage them with as you leave the space this evening, CJ.
Sure. Just as a final note, it's so kind of cliche, but it's one of those things that gets repeated a lot for a reason. But like legitimately, like follow your dreams. Like this is such a great time and such a great place to make anything work. You really can. I think before I came to college, I as a lot of students do, kind of picked one of the big ones
Mhm.
just because I knew that would succeed, and they will. But you just don't know what you can do until you try. And everyone says that, and sometimes even I get tired of hearing it, but it is honestly the truth.
That's
Follow your dreams, you will make it work. Between you and God, you will make it work.
just excellent. And I am very proud of you
Thank
for
you. Thank you.
following your dreams and not letting anything stop you. Even though you started out as an engineer major,
Mhm.
your heart wasn't there.
Mhm.
And even if you would have finished that and went on to be that wonderful engineer down the line, you wouldn't have gotten anything out of it
Mhm.
because your passion wasn't there, your heart wasn't there, and God knew what you needed to make
Right.
you happy. And
Mhm.
I am so thankful that you followed the path. And oftentimes it's the path that many people don't go down,
Mhm.
but they tell me that faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence
It
of
is.
things not seen. And that's where we've got to go with this, walking by the things that we cannot see and cannot always capitalize everything and get all the answers, but we got
Mhm.
to trust that gut feeling. And I thank you for doing that and showing us the way and showing your other people that are watching you, like those little boys we talked about that were at
Right.
last Saturday.
Mhm.
You are showing them the way. Thank you so much for being
Of
such
course.
a selfless gentleman. And I appreciate you having you as my guest on the
Yes.
podcast.
Thank you for inviting me on here.
And you are so very welcome. And be sure to like, comment, and to subscribe to the podcast, those that are listening. And be sure to go back and watch this episode in the replay. And be sure to share it with your family, friends, and loved ones. Thank you so much for being my guest this evening. And I'll look forward to connecting with you again in the very near future, Mr. CJ.
Yes, sounds good.
Thank you and have a good evening.
Welcome. You as well. You as well.
Good night.
Good night.
The Lotus Flower Podcast, season number 3, episode number 40. I'll tell you, this has been a good conversation with my guest, none other than Mr. C.J. Murphy. And I am so excited that he thought it not robbery to be here with us on the podcast this evening as we begin this month celebrating Black History Month. I want you all to know that Black is not a monolith. Here at the Lotus Flower Podcast, we want to give space to African American voices to be able to showcase their talents, their work, and who they are. We also want to encourage everyone that's listening and or watching to make sure that you like, comment, and subscribe to the podcast. In doing so, every time an episode airs, it will drop right into your inbox, and you will never miss one of these intriguing, empowering, and life changing episodes. Now, I want to hear from you, and you. I want you to tell me by leaving a comment how you might have enjoyed this episode and how you were actually impacted by what was shared. What are some things that you learned, things you maybe knew nothing of? I'd like to hear that. Go ahead and put it in the chat, either on my YouTube page or on the Lotus Flower podcast page or on the audio podcasts that are airing all over the United States and into other countries. I want you all to have an amazing rest of the day, morning, evening, wherever you find your time zone. And be sure to tune in again next week as we come back to you in this virtual and audio space on Thursday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, streaming live on the Dr. Pamela Robinson Facebook page and streaming live on the Lotus Flower YouTube channel. Have an amazing rest of the day. Bye-bye for now.